In September of 1992, a young man named Christopher McCandless was found dead inside an abandoned bus deep in the Alaskan wilderness. He had gone there looking for something: freedom, meaning, a life that felt real to him. He was 24 years old. He weighed 67 pounds. And it isn't a survival story. It's the story of what happens when a belief is tested against reality, and reality doesn't bend. What drives a young man with money, an education, and a future already laid out for him to walk away from all of it? 2 years before anyone found him, he had already started erasing himself. He gave away his savings. He cut off his family without a word. He took a new name. By the time he reached Alaska, he wasn't running from anything anyone could see anymore. He was chasing an idea. On September 6, 1992, hunters walking the Stampede Trail, deep in the Alaskan interior, found him inside an old abandoned bus at the end of all of it. He weighed 67 pounds. Most people think they already know this story through Into the Wild, the book, then the film. What follows is the part that never made it to the screen. Christopher Johnson McCandless was born on February 12, 1968, in El Segundo, California. While he was still a boy, the family relocated east, settling in Annandale, Virginia, a quiet suburb outside Washington, D.C. On paper, it looked like a comfortable life. His father, Walt McCandless, was an aerospace engineer who went on to build a successful consulting business. Both of his parents had graduated from Emory University. There was money. There was status. Underneath that, according to an account his sister Karini would later publish, the household carried a different weight. She described a father prone to heavy drinking and sudden rage, and a home where those rages sometimes ended in violence against her and her mother. It is her account of their shared childhood, not a public record, but it is the account closest to the source. There was also a secret the children didn't learn until they were already teenagers. Years before Chris was born, Walt had been married to another woman, Marcia, with whom he had 5 children, while at the same time having an affair with his secretary, Billy, who would become Chris and Karini's mother. For a period, Walt kept 2 households running at once. Chris was born in 1968, only months after Marcia gave birth to her own 5th child. Karini followed in 1971. Walt and Billy didn't marry until after Marcia divorced him in 1972. 4 years, the real timeline of their parents' lives was kept from Chris and Karini entirely. Even before any of that came to light, Chris showed a restlessness that seemed to need no explanation. At 4 years old, he slipped out of the house at 3 in the morning and walked 6 blocks alone to a friend's house, where he was later found digging through their candy drawer. His sister would say later that this part of him, the pull toward the unknown, wasn't something that happened to him. It was simply who he was. He graduated from W.T. Woodson High School in 1986, then went on to Emory University, where he excelled academically, majoring in history and anthropology and writing for the campus newspaper. It was there that his reading turned serious. Thoreau, Emerson, Jack London, Tolstoy, writers built around self-reliance, individualism, and a deep suspicion of material life. Somewhere in those years, a gap opened between the life he'd been raised to want and the life he actually believed in. He began to question the pursuit of wealth and status outright. A demanding father and a complicated family history had already taught him to question authority long before he had the language to explain why. By the time he crossed the stage at graduation in May of 1990, at 22, the questions had started to harden into something closer to a decision. The break didn't arrive all at once. It built through college, reading writers who treated solitude and simplicity not as deprivation but as the only honest way to live. He came to share their core conviction that comfort and security, the things his parents had worked to provide him, were not safety at all, but a kind of cage. He began describing himself, in private writing, as someone with little patience left for people in general, a disgust, almost, with the way most lives were arranged. It pushed him further inward rather than out toward others. What he didn't do was announce any of it. In the weeks after graduation, he kept up appearances. He let his parents believe things between them were settling into something normal. Quietly, underneath that, he had already decided otherwise. In a letter to his sister Karini, he laid it out plainly. He was going to divorce them as his parents, to cut them out of his life completely, the way you would cut out something diseased. The plan wasn't reckless in the way it's sometimes described. It was deliberate. He had already chosen the kind of present-tense urgency that would define the next 2 years. When you want something in life, his journal would later read, you just have to reach out and grab it. In the summer of 1990, he acted on it. He quietly donated nearly his entire savings, close to $24,000, to Oxfam, an anti-poverty charity, and walked away from his apartment near Emory without telling anyone where he was going. His family wouldn't hear from him again for more than 2 years. He drove west, toward Arizona. On July 4, 1990, near Lake Mead at a place called Detrital Wash, a flash flood disabled his car. Most people, at that point, would have called for help or arranged a tow. He left it where it sat and kept going on foot. That decision marks the real turn, not the road trip anymore, but a one-way journey with no built-in way back. Around this time, he began going by a new name, Alexander Supertramp. The man who'd grown up in Annandale, Virginia, with a future mapped out in front of him, didn't disappear all at once. He was shed gradually, mile by mile, until only the new name was left. What followed was nearly 2 years of movement across the American West, much of it on foot or by hitchhiking, occasionally riding freight trains. From the wreck of his car, he made his way to Lake Tahoe, then into the Sierra Nevada, picking up a stretch of the Pacific Crest Trail before turning toward the California coast. In the small town of Oric, he met 2 drifters, Jan Burrs and her companion Bob, people living a version of the unmoored life he was reaching for. Jan would stay loosely in touch with him for the rest of his travels, one of the few threads connecting him back to anyone. By autumn of 1990, he drifted into Cutbank, Montana, and from there to Carthage, South Dakota, where he met Wayne Westerberg, who ran a grain elevator. Westerberg gave him work and, more than that, something close to genuine friendship. Chris would return to Carthage more than once over the following 2 years, the closest thing to a steady relationship he maintained with anyone during this period. In between, the route wasn't a straight line toward Alaska. He bought a canoe in Topok, Arizona, and paddled the Colorado River south toward the Gulf of California, attempting to cross into Mexico near the Morelos Dam, only to be turned back for lack of identification, a small, almost ironic collision with the very bureaucracy he was trying to leave behind. By the autumn of 1991, he was working a stretch at a McDonald's in Bullhead City, Arizona, about as conventional a job as exists, sitting strangely alongside everything else he believed. He spent time in Salton City, California, then made his way back to Carthage to work for Westerberg again, reconnecting briefly with the people he'd left behind the year before. In April of 1992, in Enderlin, North Dakota, he made the decision that would carry him to the end of the story, to head north into Alaska. Along the way, he stopped to rest at Liard River Hot Springs in British Columbia, and hitchhiked the final stretch with a trucker named Gaylord Stuckey, the two of them apparently building an easy rapport over the drive. Stuckey dropped him at the University of Alaska so he could look into the local plant life before continuing on, a small detail that complicates the idea that he gave no thought at all to what he was walking into. He reached Fairbanks on April 25, 1992, by way of the Alaska Highway. 3 days later, on April 28th, an electrician named Jim Gallion picked him up hitchhiking and drove him out to the head of the Stampede Trail. Gallion would be the last person to see him alive. By Gallion's own account, he tried to talk him out of it. McCandless was carrying about 10 pounds of rice, a small stack of books, no real map, and a .22 rifle, enough for small game, not nearly enough for anything larger that might come across him in the bush. Gallion thought he looked badly underprepared for what he was about to do. McCandless thanked him and walked into the trail alone. His plan, as far as it's recorded, was to head west on foot, eventually reaching the Bering Sea. He didn't get nearly that far. Within a couple of days, he came across an old abandoned bus parked along the trail. left behind for hunters and trappers passing through, and made it his base. For the next several weeks he lived close to the way he'd imagined, hunting small game, gathering roots and berries, at one point killing a moose, though the meat from an animal that size spoiled faster than one person alone could use it. A problem the wilderness didn't offer any solution to. At some point in May, by his own hand, on a sheet of plywood, he wrote out something closer to a creed than a journal entry. Signed Alexander Supertramp, it read, in part, "So many people live within unhappy circumstances and yet will not take the initiative to change their situation because they are conditioned to a life of security, conformity, and conservatism, all of which may appear to give one peace of mind. But in reality, nothing is more dangerous to the adventurous spirit within a man than a secure future. The very basic core of a man's living spirit is his passion for adventure." And further down, 2 years he walks the earth. No phone, no pool, no pets, no cigarettes. Ultimate freedom. An extremist. An aesthetic voyager whose home is the road. No longer to be poisoned by civilization, he flees and walks alone upon the land to become lost in the wild. By early July, after roughly 2 months of self-sufficiency, he decided to head back out, toward resupply, or perhaps toward the idea of returning to ordinary life for a while. The Teclanica River, which he had crossed easily on his way in, had swollen with snow melt into something he could no longer get across. He turned back to the bus. That single, forced decision meant he would be staying for the rest of the summer. His journal entries from this stretch grow sparse, often just a word or two, mostly a running record of what he'd managed to kill and eat that day. Around day 92, he records finishing a book, Dr. Zhivago star. It would be one of the last entries of its kind. By mid-August, weakened by weeks on a diet that could no longer sustain him, he died. On September 6, 1992, hunters passing the bus found his body. He was 24 years old. He weighed 67 pounds. The official finding from the Fairbanks coroner was probable starvation. That much is settled. What remains genuinely debated is what tipped the balance. In his final recorded days, McCandless himself suspected the seeds of a plant he'd been eating, the wild or Eskimo potato, was somehow responsible. Years later, researchers working at the request of journalist John Krakauer pointed to a compound in those seeds, L-cannavanine, as a likely contributing factor, a risk that wasn't well understood or documented at the time. That theory has since been challenged by other experts examining the same evidence. The most honest summary is also the least dramatic one. He died of starvation, and something in what he was eating may have accelerated it. Exactly what, and by how much, isn't fully settled. Most of what the public knows about this story comes from Krakauer, first a magazine article, then his 1996 book, then a 2007 film directed by Sean Penn. It is also the most scrutinized part of the record. Krakauer has acknowledged having to interpret journal entries that say almost nothing on their own, and weather records have since contradicted some of the more dramatic conditions described in his account. None of that changes the basic shape of what happened. It does mean some of the texture, exact words, certain scenes, should be read as informed reconstruction, not transcript. The bus itself outlived the story by decades, drawing travelers from around the world who wanted to see it for themselves. Some of them needed rescuing. 2 of them, in 2010 and 2019, didn't survive the attempt. In 2020, Alaska state authorities removed the bus from the trail entirely and placed it in the Museum of the North in Fairbanks, out of reach of anyone trying to follow him there. What happened on the Stampede Trail has been read a dozen different ways since. Some have called it suicide. Krakauer, who spent more time with the evidence than almost anyone, argued the opposite, that a man that restless, that engaged with the world around him, doesn't fit the pattern of someone quietly waiting to die. His sister has offered a steadier reading, not that her brother failed to understand the risk, but that he understood it completely and chose it anyway, on the belief that an adventure stops being one the moment you already know how it ends. What's harder to argue with is the gap between the idea and what it actually demanded. He had built, over years of reading and reflection, a coherent philosophy, rooted in Thoreau, in Tolstoy, in a real intellectual tradition, not a whim. What he didn't have, when it mattered, was a usable map, enough food, or a way back across a river that had changed without warning. The belief gave him a reason to go. It didn't give him a way to survive what going actually required. His sister has also drawn a careful line. She has said she doesn't hold their parents responsible for the choices Chris made alone in Alaska. But she does think their dishonesty is the reason no one back home knew where he'd gone, or that he needed finding at all. The bus is gone now, sitting behind glass in a museum instead of at the end of a trail. What's left is the question it was always really about, whether the freedom he was looking for was something a person could actually walk toward, or whether it was something that only shows up by accident, somewhere between the world he was running from and the one he never got the chance to finish building alone.